Okay, hello, good morning. So we've been exploring this like UI library, and as I told, so I'm discussing uh, with Adam behind the scenes a little bit, and I think the thing I've been trying to understand is when I started building complex apps very, very early on. This is like when I was, I guess, like 22, maybe. No, wait, 24 or something, which is now like how many years ago? 15 years ago. Um, I just had this intuition about separating state from UI. I don't know why, but it's just I was overwhelmed by complexity. And for some reason, that just made a lot of sense to me. I wonder if it was the database inside out that kind of spurred, if that's a term, the perspective. And the database inside out is really about like how you have like transactions, so you can build up the state of the database at any point in time. But that's like technically how you can achieve things like time travel and stuff like that. But it also reflects that state is a database. It's not something that's just sprinkled into your UI. Anyways, so everything I've done in state management has really followed that perspective, that you have your state management and then you derive a UI from that state management. It's not like you intertwine the two. And I think I'm looking for evidence of that intuition. Like why is that intuition so strong with me? So because I had a lot of discussions over the years about this, and I don't think I've like really been able to express it. It just feels right. But a few things we did discover doing this UI lib thing is that let's see. Let's see. Is that the really, really, really good thing about React is its reconciliation of UI. It's like it's such a pure concept, and I'm thinking about this from like an engineering coding perspective. Like there's nothing more clean in coding than having a function that takes something and returns something pure. There's no fluff. It's just the normal programming language runtime. There's no overhead, nothing. It's just state returning UI. And then you can talk about JSX like being this transpilation over, so basically H div translates to, well, I guess we should do the opposite. You can talk about JSX translating to this, but the point is, like, this isn't React. React isn't JSX. JSX is just a way to not having to write this, or let's call it JSX. The beautiful thing about React is this. You have a function, you give it some state that we call props, and you get a UI back. And you can do everything you can do in a function. There's no tricks, there's nothing weird going on there. But then as React evolved and started bringing actual state management into this, that's when it started breaking down. And then you have Solid, which has this other beautiful idea of, okay, let's have this function, but it shouldn't reconcile. So just to make sure, like reconciliation is that whenever these props change, this function is going to be called again. And you don't really think about this. You just have a component, and you know whenever the component has dependencies for state, and that state changes, it's going to run the function again. And if your function is just UI, like props is awesome, return this, whatever, or return this, whatever. Like it's just a plain function. That's an amazing mental model. And here you have in Solid, you have the same stuff, but you don't have the function won't be called again whenever its dependencies change. So you can't do things like if whatever, return blah blah blah. You can't do this. So already there, it's like, okay, but how are things kept up to date? How is the UI reconciled? Like, how is the UI updated in this world? And that's when things gets tricky, because suddenly you have these special functions that you can pass as a child, for example, or you suddenly have a special component that has some special behavior where you can say each some array like this. And if you have some props here, do not destructure them, because then it's going to trigger, it's going to retrieve the value, underlying value. So you can have this observation thing going on. And there's a lot of like, the thing that's actually running isn't what's being written. So the code you write isn't the way it's executed. So long story short, what I feel like is you have to choose what's going to be the magical mental burden. With React, it's going to be state management. With Solid, it's going to be the UI. And it doesn't have to be like that. Why cram state management and UI reconciliation or UI updates into the same abstraction? Why? But I guess you can't get away from state, right? Because if you're going to put state outside of the actual components, then it's very tricky to ship a component library, for example. So they do need internal state. And this is like, it just doesn't resolve itself for me. That's the thing. That's why I keep iterating on this. It doesn't resolve. Because if I'm going to build an app, it makes so much sense to just build the app as a state machine, like build the state and all the logic for that app. And then you can implement the UI later. Like the UI is secondary. But then if I want to build a component library, for example, then I completely depend on internal state management. Or even just have a reusable component that has needs to do some state management. It's so interesting. And and when it comes to like actual application state, not like a UI state, internal UI state, you need like a use state for. You just have this question of like, okay, I have this input, I have this form. Who should have the state? Should that be in this external state management part, or should this be internally in the component? But I think the way I kind of concluded on state in components is that if the state is related to the actual UI you're going to produce, like, is it an animation? Is it like a toggle effect for something? Like, is it something that is state for the actual elements and styling? then it makes sense to have it in a component. But if it's state for the actual app, then it shouldn't be in a component. So components in its purity becomes only about elements and styling. That's the only thing they do. They only manage elements and styles. They derive application state, and they can have internal management of elements and styling. But I guess it's a blurry thing, regardless. Anyways, so I wish I had some examples. Let's see. I want to have some examples of sorry, the good, the bad. So the good here is my component or counter return, I don't know, div props. Well, the good is that I can actually destructure. Based on current count. Like, there's no magic to this. This is an actual number coming in. Actually a number. There's no abstraction over that value. There's no special props getter stuff. It's the actual thing. And then I could like simply do style color count more than 5. It's going to be red or it's going to be green, whatever. Right? This is a beautiful thing. And the bad is when you do this. Count, set count. Well, let's forget about that for now. Use the so the bad thing about this is that we just have this like, where's this state coming from? Where is it stored? How does it work? Like every time counter runs, it's going to call useState and set it to 0, but it only happens the first time. And the other times it's going to be the actual current value. And then you have like use effect of like count and then console log count. Yeah, I'm like, there's just so many bad things. I'm having a hard time. Like just the fact that you can't instantiate anything, like components has to be side effect free. So you can't instantiate anything that causes a side effect. Unless you make sure to dispose of it. But the point is that with concurrent mode, the only way to dispose of something is to use an effect. But in concurrent mode, that effect might not even run. So if you instantiate something you need to use during the render phase, you can't dispose of it. This is the whole impact thing. So I'm just trying to find a way for me to accumulate all the pain points in a way that just doesn't make it overwhelming. I'm not sure how to do this. Maybe I should just try to write like a list of notes. I don't know. The good runs, everything is just, state is just plain values. No abstractions, no magic, no behavior change. Behavior change after compilation. Pass down props as values. No conversion and the structure. Yeah, maybe I should just put this in one list, like, because where it's good is where the other one is bad. In React state, it's just plain values. No abstraction, no signal abstractions, no magic, and no behavior change after compilation. Like converting count to count. And no magic. Right. No signal abstractions, signal primitives. How should I put this? It's just plain no value abstractions like signals, and what was the other thing? And no compilation changing the runtime. For example, statically extract, or for example, extracting count, but compiles to count to make it reactive. Pass down props as values and the structure. In React, pass down props as values and the structure. No special compilation, making props getters, breaking reactivity when you destructure in as a component. I hate that. It's just really, really bad. Consistent use of state primitives. React has consistent use of state primitives. Oh, let's see, summary UI and then summary state. Sorry, I have a cold. I just have to blow my nose. 2 seconds. Okay, yeah, this is great because this is the thing, right? They have the strengths and weaknesses in UI and state. Pass down state to probes as well. Plain values and the structure. No special. Has consistent use of state primitives. No special signal count versus proxy based create store. Right, so it's consistent. It's just JavaScript, right? So you don't care about it. Well, here you have to consider that some things should be unwrapped using just calling the signal, and other times you don't have to do that because it implicitly does it when you like dot in property access on the store. Okay, and then in solid there is the component function runs once, allowing you to in solid, the component function runs once. Allowing you to define state and logic without considering, how should I put this? Removing the mental burden of the function being called again and again. Reconciliation. In solid, observation allows for pinpointed UI updates, not diffing full component trees. So it's very, very fast. In solid, you can instantiate at component creation and dispose on unmount. React has no unmount, and an effect does not reliably run in concurrent mode, causing an instantiation during render phase to become memory leaks. In solid, there is no reconciliation loop, so no effect dependencies. There are no effect dependencies, closures, trapping values, and special primitives like use effect event. For fuck's sake, they're just band-aiding the whole fucking thing. And special band-aids like use effect event. Basically, the whole concept of the component function living having a timeline of executions does not exist. This is the biggest mental burden with React, and it's because of state management. It's not because of reconciliation and updating the UI. Because that's where you want to have a timeline, right? When you just use a component to return UI, that mental model of having a timeline is also what like allows you to do all these really cool things of like time travel, the UI and everything. You understand that there's a timeline happening because the function is called again and again, and every time it changes the returned result. But with state and effects and everything else, it becomes a huge burden. In solid, there is no need to compile to complex unrecognizable code for optimizations, whereas React compiler compiled code is very difficult to read. Yeah, I think this is kind of the whole thing. And the point is that there are good things about UI. So yeah. So I want reconciliation for my UI. And I don't want reconciliation for my state. This is the whole thing. I want reconciliation for my UI, and I do not want reconciliation for my state. This is the whole thing. This could be the freaking title of an article. And the question is like, how would you be able to do this? How would you be able to do this when these two concepts are merged into a component? I know that Vue actually can do this, because we did explore that whole Vue concept as well. So the way that worked is you would have like my component, and then you would be able to like set your state here, create state, and then you would return a function that will be your actual UI. So you would always return a function, and this function is the thing that's called again and again. This is the reconciler. So if you use like state dot foo, whatever, so this becomes like an observation scope. Instead of this becoming an observation scope, this is the observation scope. So you can just use values as normal, right? It's much technically simpler, but people are like, oh, I have to do this thing. Like I have to return a function from a function, what the fuck? But this is the only way to combine those two concepts, so that my component runs once, you can still have like on cleanup, on mount, like these explicit things, but then you make this an observation scope that's going to reconcile, just like React would do, having observers. And this is fine, right? You don't need this to be like the observation scope. So only this text node updates, right? It's perfectly fine to return like a new virtual DOM description, do the diffing, and then update the DOM. That's perfectly fine. That's not where your problems come from. Yeah, but the thing with Vue that kind of put us off from Vue was that it has all this weird stuff. Like if you pass props, you can't destructure. If you pass props, it's going to be applied automatically to the first element. Like it had so many weird behaviors. That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Yeah, anyways, so this would be a way to, yeah, now I started thinking about this. Sorry, I have to blow my nose again. Yeah, so the thing I didn't get to, thanks for the question, by the way. So the thing I didn't get to is if you accept, so with Solid, when you write Solid code, it's much more like a templating language than what React does. So React is just converting JSX to these function calls, and it's just, there's no magic there. There's nothing such a thing as a templating language. But with Svelte or Vue or Angular, these are templating languages. Like they have their own way of expressing dynamic UIs, and then they convert that to some code that you will never read, right? And that is perfectly fine. And this is where Solid kind of hits a tension point, because as a React developer going into Solid and you see the JSX and you kind of think about it the same way you do as with React, but it doesn't behave the same way. And there is compilation going on there. So it is like right in the middle of being a templating language and not being a templating language, which is, for me, makes it so confusing. Anyways, so, but the question you have to answer is, do I want like a pure JavaScript solution, or do I want a templating language? And I just love using the language like I do in React, but I don't like the state management of React because of all this fucking overhead and the mental strain. I have used templating languages, like I remember back in the day using Backbone. But I think the biggest challenge for me is like TypeScript. Like I can't imagine like creating something without TypeScript. At least not something complex, even though I have done it. So with these templating languages, they have to have their own custom implementation of TypeScript, type detection and everything on top of that, which is very complex. It slows things down, and isn't the ideal experience. Unlike React, where TypeScript understands JSX, it's built into TypeScript. So there's absolutely no overhead on the type checking or any like bugs related to the templating language and so on and so on. But yeah, I do agree though. Like creating a templating language to express dynamic UIs is a good thing. And it has helped a lot of developers to kind of just be productive. But there is you have to like accept it with its quirks, that you won't understand the compiled code, that you can get into situations where you don't understand what's going on and you can't like debug it either because it's hidden in the magic of how all of this is handled. But these are all just considerations. And if you're like super productive using a templating language, then you should use a templating language, like or a solution that uses templates like Svelte or Vue or one of those. Or if you are productive using React, you should be using React. But yeah. Personally, I just can't deal with this. I just can't deal with just having this amazingly simple concept of state UI. Just using JavaScript. It's just a function. It's so attractive to me that I have to have it. And then the cost of that in the current situation is that I have to take the pain of dealing with state management. Okay, but I guess there is one way to combine them though. Runs once. Let's see if I can do this. Observes reconciliation on changes. Yeah. So this is the actual, this is the expression of merging them. So you have state management for a function that runs once, and then you have a function that is your UI. And here you can do like if state foo return blah, for example. Like you can do things like that. It's just gonna work. But no one has really built that. Because you need to have like two things. You need a reconciler, and you need a component tree. Yeah, maybe this would be fun to try to build. Because this is what we wanted to build when we did the view thing. Because view is able to do this, but yeah, it had all these other quirks to it. Because what is nice about this is that it really solves everything. Like if you have a component here and you pass it props, those props are just going to be props, right? So you don't need like these special getters around props, for example, because it's not in this scope. What's interesting though is that you could technically create an abstraction for this in React, I think. No, you couldn't do that. No, sorry. Okay, so I'm kind of stuck again. What do I want to do? Do I want to explore? Okay, I want to ask. Let's ask ChatGPT. Let's see. The whole family is sick today. Okay. Yeah, the whole family is sick today, including myself. This time of year. Anyways, let's ask it. So I have this code. So I'm reflecting on state management and UI, like how React has this beautiful idea of UI being a function of state, which is just the most fundamental pure idea I ever seen, and I love it. But then it has the reconciliation loop, which makes sense for UI, but becomes a big problem with state management, like use state, use effect, all hooks. And they're constantly band-aiding the experience with new hooks to prevent getting into issues with stale closures. There's these dependency arrays. Like it's very, very complex with state management, but it's the purest form of UI when you only do UI, like a pure function. Now, on the other side, you have something like solid, which only calls the component function once, which simplifies state management because there's no like reconciliation and a lot of stuff you have to consider around that. But since it doesn't do like an observation scope around the whole component, it does observation in like parts of the returned JSX, which is hard to reason about. And you have to do make sure that you actually extract the values of these signals correctly. When you pass props, you can't destructure because that's gonna unwillingly extract the value immediately. It doesn't become observable in the nested component. And there are like issues with UI certainly when you go to solid. But with this example I'm showing you now, you have this strong separation between state management in a component that runs once, and then it rather returns an observation scope that does reconciliation. So it basically tracks access to the state and that function will reconcile. And I'm thinking this is the best of both worlds. Now, I know that Vue kind of allows this way of writing code, but it has other weird stuff to it, like the way that you have fall through props and other weird behaviors. So I wanted to see if I could actually build something myself, but I'm wondering how to approach it, because I need a reconciler, but I also need to implement like a component tree on top of this. And I was wondering, what would you suggest doing here to make this work? Boom. I'm just gonna blow my nose again. 2 seconds. Oh my god. Love this direction. Of course you do. Runs one setup per component. Return a reactive render closure that observes whatever it reads and only reruns and reconciles windows. This can give you a React's UI as a function of state feel without React's re-invocation semantics, and Solid's fine-grained updates without Solid's don't destructure footgun if you design observation boundary carefully. Yeah, like I was thinking not having fine-grained. But whatever. Yeah, you know what? There's one thing we didn't discuss. It's the props. Like, where do you get the props? Because yeah, because you still have a problem. Yeah. So we can't really ask it yet because there's a problem with props. If we pass the props here, so this is why it doesn't really work. It's because there is a composition issue. So if I receive the props up here, it means that these are only received once. So if you want to access the latest prop, you can't destructure. If you destructure, you'll only access the prop at the time of creation, right? But if you get the props here, these props will always be the latest props due to reconciliation. So here you can destructure. And then the question is, okay, should you receive props here? But not here. But what if you need props up here? Like you have initial count, for example. So should you receive props both places? Maybe. So this will always be initial values, and this will always be values up to date. But what if you need that prop to be part of some logic here, like after it's been created, like an effect or something? Then you're kind of fucked again. So maybe, for example, on cleanup, if props, whatever, do this, right? You might want to do that. But nowadays, props aren't going to be up to date if you do whatever. But if you do whatever here, it's always going to be the latest one. So yeah, this is the thing. It's like you just can't make these two worlds work together. And I think where things get lost, where people kind of just see the component, and then oh, this looks beautiful, right? And then the props thing often gets like left behind. Like we don't talk about props enough. Because that's also a point where things like the mental strain starts. or mental strain is an issue. Um, but then you could say things like, what if components has like so if I were gonna mount this component, like my component, just like React has like a ref property that's specific to, oh my god, components and elements, you could have something like a, I don't know, constructor. Uh, I have to go. We have a crisis here. Bye.